How's it going, everybody? This is Sultan Productions. Today, we're going to be talking about the Asian gangs found within the Orange County area, right? Now, in my experience, the Asian community is a humble and respectful community, right? They're the kind of people that don't really disrespect, they don't really get out of line, right? But they're also very dangerous. They also have a history of protecting their own, right? They have a history of standing up against oppressors, right? They're nothing to play with, you know? So you must give them the respect that they deserve, right? They've put in work. They have also put themselves on the map as far as in Orange County. Now, there's a few different gangs found within Orange County, right? The Tiny Rascal gangs. There's also the Acro Crazy Boys. There's also the Vietnam Together. There's many different neighborhoods found within Orange County. The Fullerton Boys, and we're gonna talk about a few of them. And before I continue this video, first off, I want to say please like, comment, share, and subscribe to my channel. It'll help me out a lot. Also, much respect to these gangs. I'm only talking about your neighborhoods regarding public knowledge, things that people could find online. So let's get to it. On the wee hours of March 20, 2011, members of five Vietnamese criminal street gangs somehow ended up together at a Little Saigon karaoke restaurant, and the fist fight occurred after cursing and mad dogging. The hoodlums in the Tiny Rascals gang and their allies in Hellside apparently weren't fond of the gangsters in Viet Together, Power of Viet, and Asian Family. To express their displeasure, all sides usually liked to vandalize their opponents' homes in Westminster, Garden Grove, Fountain Valley, and Santa Ana. But on this particular night, TRG members threw a party, got wasted, planned an ambush, retrieved a gun, drove to the Billiards Phi Hong pool hall popular with VT, POV, and AF, and used about 7 vehicles to block parking lot exits so nobody could escape. The confrontation spurred a deep psychological exchange. Someone yelled, "Fuck AF." Someone else said, "Fuck VT." Then, before everybody began screaming their own gang name, somebody else added, "Fuck Asian Family." An SUV loaded with VT, POV, and AF managed to flee, but a member of TRG sitting in the passenger seat of a pursuing vehicle fired 3 to 5 shots. Victims Scotty Vui died and Roger James suffered serious wounds. The evening was also life-changing for Tien Phuoc Phung, a TRG lieutenant. Though Phung was at the scene, he wasn't the shooter. He wasn't even in the vehicle with the shooter. But an Orange County jury convicted him of first-degree murder, attempted murder, shooting at an occupied motor vehicle, and street terrorism. Jurors also found Phung guilty of committing his crimes for the benefit of a gang. The defendant appealed his trial as unfair to a California Court of Appeal in Santa Ana. He contends police and prosecutors failed to find sufficient evidence to support the convictions, but this month a 3-justice panel noted once again a point that has yet to be grasped among Orange County gangsters. You don't have to be a shooter in a killing to face murder charges. The prosecutor did not need to prove Phung had any subjective knowledge or intent that a murder, attempted murder, or discharge of a firearm would occur. Ecola, on behalf of himself and his colleagues, Justices Kathleen E. O'Leary and Eileen C. Moore, it was enough to prove that Phung intended to aid and abet one of the target offenses, and that the crimes actually committed by shooter Benjamin Nguyen were natural and probable consequences of the target offense. Everything that happened before and after the actual shooting supports the conclusion that Phung aided, promoted, and encouraged the target offenses by providing backup to his allies. And that's what happens. Sometimes you don't need to be the guy that pulls the trigger. You'll still end up getting busted. A lot of the times the people that didn't even pull the trigger get busted, and the real trigger puller is actually free. It happens. It's gang life, right? Let's stay away from it. Defendant Sergio Gonzalez was convicted of the second-degree murder of Sam Chi. True findings were made that he personally discharged the firearm causing the victim's death and that he personally used the firearm in the murder. The jury returned a not true finding that he committed the crime for the benefit of a criminal street gang. He was found not guilty of street terrorism. The court sentenced defendant to 40 years to life in prison. Santa Ana police officer Jesus de la Barcena went to the scene of a stabbing at Century High School on September 11, 2006. His description of the defendant was very emotional. He appeared to be very angry, and when his mom showed up, he became a little bit more emotional and went to her and gave her a hug. Defendant told his mother not to worry, that he knew who had done it. It was some chinos, in Spanish, Chinese. Defendant then placed a telephone call. 5 persons were arrested for stabbing Oscar Gonzalez, defendant's 14-year-old brother. All 5 claim allegiance to a criminal street gang known as Tiny Rascals or TRG. Oscar Gonzalez, who died 2 days after he was stabbed, claimed the Little Mini Street Gang. The victim of the shooting murder, Sam Chi, whose moniker was Midget, was a member of WDC or We Don't Care gang. The 3 who were arrested and charged with the instant shooting, defendant Abel H. and Antonio Barbosa, were also members of the Little Mini Street Gang. Defendant was 15 on September 11, 2006. Some girl called him out about 3 p.m. and said his brother was surrounded by a lot of people and was being stabbed. She said to hurry over. Defendant ran to Century High School. When he got to the scene of the stabbing, he was told his brother had been attacked by Cambodians. At one point, while he was at the scene, he was placed in a police car and overheard a police officer radio, "The people who had hurt my brother were 5 Asian gang members from TRG or WDC." Afterward, Barbosa twice asked defendant what he was going to do about it. Defendant started walking towards the train tracks. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Barbosa and Abel. He looked over the fence and saw 3 people. I knew one of them was Fanny. She was from WDC. And at the same time, Tony handed me something. I looked over and it was a gun. He said that was the first time he realized Barbosa was carrying a gun, and that he had intended to fight whoever came along that was a gang member that hurt my little brother. But with his hands, defendant placed the gun into his waistband. He looked over and saw a car with 3 male Asian gang members inside. Defendant walked up to the car and asked the victim where he was from. The response was, "We don't care," as well as a gang sign for Dub to defendant that meant the Asian gang WDC. At trial, defendant said he thought somebody from WDC had stabbed his brother. He said, "In my head, I said I found who did it and I shot into the car." Then he looked around and everything seemed brighter, wider. I seen 2 figures running away and I assumed it was Tony and Abel, so I followed them. Abel was 13 years old when he testified, but 12 on the day of the murder. He said he was in the 6th grade of September 11, 2006, when his friend Oscar Gonzalez was stabbed. After the stabbing, Abel was sitting outside some apartments when defendant's uncle dropped him off. Defendant started walking around and Abel said, "We started following him like we had to run to catch up to him." Abel saw Tony pass something to defendant. The prosecutor asked who Tony was, and Abel answered, "Tony, the one who got sentenced on this case. They saw a car in Sergio, hit them up, which is a gang thing, for telling them where they're from." Abel said he turned his back and then he heard a gunshot and started running. Fanny Sam claimed that the We Don't Care gang in the past, but no longer does. On September 11, 2006, she saw a shooting. She said she was walking and I just saw a group of people walking all wearing white t-shirts. She estimated there were like 13 people coming from the railroad tracks right behind her apartment building. She said she saw them coming up to a black car where my brother's friend's car was. Her brother's friend was named Midget. He was seated in the front passenger seat. Two others were in the car Fanny saw. Some guy pull out a gun. The others surrounded the car. She heard three shots and went into her house. Fanny says she remembered telling a detective that she recognized the guy who shot the gun as Sergio Gonzalez. Matthew McLeod, who works for the Santa Ana Police Department, is a detective who interviewed Fanny on September 19, 2006. Fanny told McLeod that the defendant shot the gun that day and that she knew the defendant's brother Oscar. McLeod said, she told us that from her vantage point, which was approximately 20 feet from the victim vehicle, if you will, she saw Sergio Gonzalez, who was wearing a white t-shirt at the time, lift up his t-shirt and draw a handgun. Using the right hand from his waistband area, pointed at the front passenger side of the vehicle and fired. I think 2 shots that she said into the vehicle. You know, it's treacherous right there on Little Mini Street because of the Tiny Rascal Gang and the Little Mini Street neighborhood right there. This is a letter written by someone that lived in Mini Street. Walk toward the alley, past the gamblers. Walk toward the alley, past the gamblers, tossing down cards and cash. Walk past the grade schoolers, skipping rope in the dirt. Past the Tiny Rascal Gang members puffing Marlboros. Climb the stairs into an apartment D, and the man with a sagging face and an eye that won't shut steps into the light. He is Muth Fall, a survivor of Cambodia's killing fields. A former soldier who hid in the jungle after the communists took over, living off spiders, worms, and snakes. Fall 52 barks a few works in Khmer, the language of Cambodia. And most of his 12 children scamper into a bedroom. I hurt, says Fall, whose face has been paralyzed since the day communist soldiers beat him with a rifle butt. I'm never happy. Fall is among the walking wounded in Santa Ana's Mini Street neighborhood, home to an estimated 3,000 Cambodians. Like many others, Fall is disabled, carrying the mental and physical scars of war. He says he needs the government's help because he is too sick to work. A 1991 study of the Mini Street community showed that 91% of the residents received some form of government assistance. That compares to about 11% for the rest of Orange County. Leaders of California's Cambodian community say they are hard-pressed to fault their countrymen because the refugees have been through so much. At least 2 million Cambodians, nearly a third of their nation's population, died of disease, starved, or were killed during the communist rule from 1975 to 1978. Everybody lost somebody, says Pres Oof Howell, past president of the refugee group, the Cambodian Association of America. Those who escaped death spent years in refugee camps in Thailand. The fact that they do as well as they do is remarkable, says Gretchen van Varnell, a researcher who has studied Orange County's Cambodians. They lived through hell. Most of Orange County's Cambodians live on or near Mini Street. It's the largest concentration of Cambodians in the state outside of Long Beach. Refugee groups began settling Cambodians on Mini Street in the early 80s because housing was plentiful. The isolated stretch bordered on one side by railroad tracks. It's lined with faded blue, beige, and gold apartments. The city of Garden Grove was first claimed for Spain as part of the Santa Ana Valley, discovered by Gaspar de Portola in 1769. It changed hands as a province during the independence of Mexico in 1822 to becoming a territory of the United States as a concession at the Mexican-American War, signing of the 1848 Guadalupe Hidalgo Treaty. Alonzo Cook is credited as the city's founding father when he bought 160 acres of land donating an open tract for the first schoolhouse and post office, suggesting the name Garden Grove for the grassy plain and planting trees to make it beautiful. Its farming community remained through the 1905 slew of settlers brought in on the Pacific Electric Railroad until the population boom of servicemen coming back from World War II necessitated its incorporation as a city in 1956. The population of Garden Grove is estimated at 173,067 in 2008, the per capita income at 20,022, and median household income at 59,981 in 2005 and 2006, respectively. The 2009 population was 39% Hispanic, 31% Asian Pacific, and 26% white. A Garden Grove man was shot and killed, and a teenager was wounded when a group of men believed to be gang members fired at them in a Vietnamese cafe, Santa Ana police said on Thursday. Trien Duc Tran, 18, died at the scene, and a 16-year-old Garden Grove boy was taken to UCI Medical Center in Orange after the 10:37 p.m. shooting Wednesday at Co May Cafe. The wounded teenager, whose name was not released for fear of retaliation in what authorities called a gang-related shooting, was listed in fair condition with a gunshot wound in the right shoulder. Both victims were seated inside the cafe at a video game table when a group of men came into the establishment, walked directly toward them, and began shooting. There were no words spoken. It was not known how many shots were fired or what kind of guns were used. Information on the assailants was sketchy because most of the patrons were gone by the time police arrived at the cafe at 2709 West 17th Street. But there were 2 to 5 participants in the group, and they used at least 2 guns, Hilton said. The shooting happened at a time when Congress is holding hearings in Washington about the growth of Asian organized crime in California. There are about 80 Indo-Chinese gangs operating in Orange County, according to the Senate Government Affairs Permanent Investigation Subcommittee. The gangs, often hyper-violent, commit home invasion robberies, extortion, auto thefts, and auto burglaries, according to testimony. On Thursday afternoon at Co May, there were no traces left of the violence from the previous night. As a Vietnamese valet played over the speakers, a waitress cashier sat at the cash register, and 7 young men played either video games or Chinese checkers while they sipped drinks. Van An Dao, the employee, said she did not work Wednesday night and did not know details of the attack. The owners of the cafe could not be reached, she said. The patrons present said they did not witness the killing. The customers here, some are regulars and some aren't, Dao said. Last night it must have been a vendetta carried in from outside. It rarely happens. I've been working here 6 months now, and that was the first time. Like most other Vietnamese cafes in the county, Co May is mostly a gathering place for young men. It serves coffee, sweet drinks, sodas, and sandwiches. On a September night in 2000, in a restaurant parking lot, members of the Triad Boys criminal street gang, including Kevin Kim, tried to take the wallets of Randy Hong and other members of the Fullerton Boys criminal street gang. The Triad Boys members screamed out their gang affiliation and asked Randy Hong whether he was from the Fullerton Boys. Randy Hong and a Triad Boys member agreed to meet at a park for a one-on-one fist fight to settle the dispute. The fight was to take place on September 12th. Believing that the Fullerton Boys were known to ambush people, the Triad Boys decided to bring a gun just in case. Defendant, a leader and founding member of the Triad Boys, ordered 2 other members to pick up a gun at his house. The gun was given to Kevin Kim. Defendant brought a box of bullets for the gun, and Kevin Kim loaded the magazine with about 10 bullets. 8 Fullerton Boys drove 4 cars to the park, a Lexus driven by Jerry Pan, with passengers Russell Su, David Sun, and Kin Ao. A Honda Passport driven by David Young with passenger Michael One, a Maxima driven by Randy Hong with no passengers, and a truck driven by Jason Kim with no passengers. They emerged from the cars and waited in the center of the grass. 8 Triad boys arrived at the park in 2 cars, a dark Toyota Camry driven by defendant, a white Toyota Camry driven by Jason Liu. Riding in defendant's dark Camry were Kevin Kim in the front passenger seat with Justin Liu and Thomas Kim in the back seat. Luis passengers in the white Camry were Leonard Noto, Michael Chang, and Luis Liu. The Triad boys drove into a park to see how many people were in there and observed quite a few people based on their cigarette embers. Glowing in the night, the 2 Camrys split up and drove in opposition directions on the street around the park. Around midnight, the Fullerton boys were about to leave to go home when a car drove by and somebody said that's the guys. Immediately, the Fullerton boys jumped in their cars and chased the white Camry. Lowe, a passenger in the dark Camry, received a phone call from the guys in the white car. Noto in the white Camry, sounding scared and urgent on the phone, told Lowe they were being chased and needed help. The dark Camry turned around, headed back over there, and saw the white Camry being chased by other cars. The dark Camry turned and tried to follow them. On the phone, Noto told Lowe the white Camry was in a dead-end street. The Fullerton boys' vehicles had followed the white Camry into a cul-de-sac. The Lexus was last in a chase. All the vehicles were trying to make a U-turn to the neck of the cul-de-sac, and due to the congestion, the Lexus attempted a 3-point turn. The dark Camry driven by defendant entered the cul-de-sac at the same time as the white Camry exited the street. Noto in the white Camry phoned defendant and said, "Blast, blast, blast them." The dark Camry stopped beside the first car, and Kevin Kim fired gunshots from out the Camry's sunroof. The driver of the Lexus heard gunshots and saw a body sitting outside another car. Approaching from behind, he heard glass breaking around him as he tried to put the car into reverse and drive forward to exit the cul-de-sac. His car backed into the dark Camry. He heard somewhere in between 1 to 20 gunshots. He felt a bullet hit his shoulder blades and turned to see front passenger Sun's face bleeding and in the back seat unconscious. Fullerton boy Young, driving the Passport around the end of the cul-de-sac, saw a car pulled up next to the Lexus and heard popping noises. Young's passenger Juan screamed, "Get down." Juan opened the passenger door and jumped out of the car. Young stayed in the car and dug down. As Young was leaned over to the right, he noticed the car had pulled up to the right side, the passenger side of the car, and next thing he knew, he heard glass shattering, felt like throbbing pain in his left leg and searing pain in his shoulder and his left arm. The dark Camry had continued into the cul-de-sac, stopped at the Passport, and Kevin Kim had shot at it, hitting the driver 3 times. Randy Hung, driving the Maxima, heard gunshots. He then saw and heard a dark car come up next to him, and a passenger inside shot 4 times at his Maxima. The passenger fired the shots through the dark Camry's window. In total, Kevin Kim had shot at 3 vehicles. Defendant, the driver, had stopped the dark Camry at each car at each location at each time of these shootings. Su, a passenger in the Lexus, ultimately died from a gunshot wound to the back of his lower head, consistent with someone who was leaning forward or crouching when struck by the bullet. In a police interview, defendant admitted he gave a box of ammunition for the gun to Kevin Kim, who loaded the magazine with about 10 rounds, drove the car which Kevin Kim fired shots, and had been a member of the Triad boys since the gang started. A search of defendant's bedroom uncovered a box of 9mm ammunition, missing 11 rounds. The ammunition was consistent with the cartridges cases found at the crime scene. It's crazy how a fist fight could turn into a shooting real quick, you know. In the afternoon of July 21, 1994, Tony Nguyen was giving some members of the Cheap Boys gang a ride home. Vin Kevin Lack was in the front passenger seat of the car Tony was driving. Tin Dam and his girlfriend, China Vu, were in the back seat. Vu was a member of the Southside Scissors, a female Asian street gang. Several more members of the Cheap Boys gang were following in another car. Tony stopped his car at a stoplight in Garden Grove Boulevard, and another car stopped beside him to his left. He recognized the girl driving the car, later identified as Mi Tran, and saw a male later identified as Nia Fan in the front passenger seat, but could not see the people in the back because the windows were kind of cloudy of dirt. Tony smiled at the girl driving in the car and then turned away because he didn't want to stare. When the traffic signal turned green, he heard gunshots and fell to the seat. Fan had fired 4 or 5 shots. Tony was shot in the neck and was paralyzed from the neck down. At the scene of the crime, Lack, who had been in the front passenger seat of Tony's car, told the police that he could not identify anyone in the other car, but he thought they were members of the Nip family because they were enemies of the Cheap Boys. A few days later, Lack realized that the male sitting in the back seat behind the shooter was defendant, who lived downstairs from him. Lack had bumped into defendant 5 or 6 times prior to the shooting. Some days after the shooting, defendant came to Lack's apartment and asked what's up with the cops. Lack assured defendant that he has said nothing to the police. At trial, Lack identified defendant in court as a person in the other car who sat in the back seat behind the shooter. Lack also testified that just prior to the incident, the shooter's car passed Tony's car, and as it did so, defendant stared back at the occupants of Tony's car. The shooter's car went into a restaurant parking lot and waited for Tony's car to pass, and then pulled out to meet it at the stoplight on Garden Grove Boulevard. On November 24th, 1994, on Thanksgiving, around 8:30 p.m., Hugh Nguyen was shot multiple times, first outside and then inside a video game arcade called Mission Control in Garden Grove. He testified that he was standing outside the arcade when a guy approached him and asked if he was in the Tiny Rascals gang. Hui said he only had friends in the gang. He added that the guy thought that I belonged to Tiny Rascals and that he hit me on the face one time. Hugh claimed that he remembered little of what happened after he was punched, but he testified that he heard gunshots and ran into Mission Control. He saw blood all over his body, found he was unable to move, and then lost consciousness. Hugh is now partially paralyzed. He cannot walk, but he has regained some movement on his arms. He could not remember much about the shooting and could not identify the person who shot him. Cindy testified that she had gone outside of Mission Control with 2 friends to smoke a cigarette. She heard Hugh, who was associated with the Tiny Rascals gang, start to yell at someone in Vietnamese. Penn had seen that person the day before at a motel nearby. He had displayed a gun. Hugh approached the person and punched him in the face. The person punched Hugh back, and several of Hugh's friends joined the fight. Although there were many witnesses, few were able to identify the shooter. Cham Ryon Chun was smoking a cigarette outside Mission Control with her friends. Penn and Chris Nguyen when she noticed Hugh arguing with someone in Vietnamese. The 2 men started fighting and other people tried to stop the fight. Chun then heard a gunshot and turned and saw defendant fire a gun twice, so she ran. So, with that being said, the Asian gangs in Orange County, they're nothing to play with, In general, you just gotta respect men in general, you can't be walking around passing negative energy, You never know when it's gonna come back to bite you. Everything we do in life, comes back to haunt us at the end of the day. So we must tread lightly, my people. Stay safe and have a good night. Al ratos.